Welcome, and thank you for joining our guest speakers today in their discussion of FDI Tools and Resources. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our partner MDB Insight for sponsoring the session today. And I would like to ask Paul Blay to jump in and say a few words about his organization and then introduce the session panelists.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Pat. Hello out there to my fellow EDA members. I'm here in Kingston, and one of my great hopes for last month was to play host to all of you who are going to be coming for the EDAC conference that was going to be held here in the city. Maybe we'll get another shot at it in the coming years, and if we do, I'm going to be really pleased to be able to show you some of my favorite spots, like this beautiful courtyard that has a couple of restaurants in it, and it's home to my favorite pub, the Toolkit, which is right behind me. Like EDAC, I look forward to the EDA conference every year. Don't we all? Over the last few months, I've been able to get to Alberta for some projects, but it's just not the same as being in a conference room with you, sharing stories about life in general, and talking about your work you're doing and the plans that you have for your communities. Even with the challenges of 2020, MDB Insight has a lot to be grateful for. You, our friends and colleagues in Alberta, are a special part of that. So it only made sense for us to continue the long-standing partnership that we have with EDA. And it's hard to believe. I'm no Rick Mercer. All right, I got to look at some notes. It's hard to believe. But now we've sponsored this conference for more than 10 years running. Those of you who know us know that we've worked on hundreds of economic development, workforce development, and market research projects in Alberta since the company was formed in 2008. Since COVID began, we've been able to provide economic resiliency and recovery strategies and other assistance to places from north to south across your beautiful provinces, places like Lac La Biche, Bonnyville, Vegreville, Grand Prairie, Leduc, Ponoka, Rocky Mountain House, Knee Hill, Medicine Hat. For those of you who don't know us, we work on projects large and small. We work on strategic planning and offer innovative and affordable platforms and tools that help communities plan for their post-pandemic realities. And they're proving particularly popular at this moment in time. You can find more about those on our website. You can look for Vicinity Jobs and Triage BRNE, for instance. Please take care. Please be safe out there, everyone. We miss our Alberta friends, and we look forward to seeing you again face to face really soon. With that, I'm happy to introduce our panelists for this FDI session, Natalie Gibson and Chris Steele. Natalie Gibson is president of Innovisions and Associates and one of EDA's community economic development trainers. She has a specialty in economic development and community development strategies. Chris Steele from Conway has over 25 years experience in corporate location and facilities consulting with an emphasis on site selection, configuration strategy, business planning, economic development and business attraction, and real estate costs and capital analysis. I'm sure they're going to put on a great session for you. As for Chandra and I, we're heading off to the Toolkit.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the introduction, Pat and Paul. Appreciate it. As mentioned today, Chris and I are going to cover FDI Tools and Resources, foreign direct investment, the magic bullet for all communities, correct? Today we're going to talk about the new tool the Economic Developers of Alberta has just released, the Foreign Direct Investment Toolkit. We're going to talk about FDI trends around the world, even in the pandemic. Where is the investment? How is it happening? And best practices. We're going to talk about understanding investment, what that looks like right now, and the scenarios moving ahead in the next year or two. Resiliency and recovery. It's one thing to bounce back in this economy, but resiliency is what does business and investment look like in the years to come. We're going to share with you a number of what we call survivability best practices for the businesses in your community where most of the new investment happens. And then we're going to wrap up with tools and resources that you might consider to adapt and use in your community or your province in helping your businesses and economic development organizations pivot. And of course, we'll wrap up with a summary and question and answer. We look forward to the question and answer period. So to start off with, the investment attraction, of course, is a core economic development strategy. Last spring, the economic developers of Alberta, supported by International Economic Development Council, worked together to customize a foreign direct investment guidebook. EDA certainly appreciated the financial contribution towards the FDI guide from the Can Export Community Investment Program established by the Government of Canada. As a community economic development trainer for EDA, I reached out to one of North America's top FDI specialists, Mr. Steele, who is with me today from Conway Inc. Yay! Yay. The new FDI Toolkit identifies how individual economic development practitioners and organizations can effectively plan, prepare, execute investment attraction strategies. Today, we are going to go over some of those investment strategies and present concepts and best practices from around the world, COVID aside. Now, as we all know as economic practitioners, there are dozens of different economic strategies, starting with the foundational strategy of business retention, investment, attraction, and expansion. Like AcDev 101, that's always the starting point, or should be. Foreign direct investment is but one strategy focused on inbound investment as a driver for economic growth, employment, and community sustainability. International trade flows are disrupted on a scale never seen before right now. According to the UN Conference on Trade Development, global FDI is expected to contract in the next year by 40%. Both supply and demand are experiencing shocks. We assume the contraction of FDI inflows will last a while. What does a while look like? My first pandemic, so we really don't know. In the present global crisis, our role of economic development organizations is to first support businesses in order to support investment in our own backyard. There is no more important time than right now for you as an EDO to reach out, engage, and support any and all your businesses. Can you help them recover? Can you help them thrive? Can you help them survive? And the best way to start is by gathering current relevant information and build relationships with the businesses located in your community. Now, this statistic has been around for years. 80 to 90% of new business investment comes from your existing community. How do you know exactly how much new investment comes into your community if you haven't done some form of business visitation program or gathered data more than anecdotal type surveys? You have to gather primary data, qualitative and quantitative data, in order to make the decisions to build programs that support businesses now. All levels of government should utilize data to create a revised policy, allocate resources, invest in a project to resolve challenges for businesses, or to help them pursue new opportunities and market access. Good data drives the public and private decisions. An economic community snapshot could also include the type and composition of businesses in your trade region, their supply chains, which are changing daily right now, transportation corridors, and the government agencies that are actively working is on a municipal, provincial, and federal level on government regulations and policies to support business. As an EDO, you need to gather that data to be able to pass it on to the decision makers. Be able to fill it in a way that makes sense to your community and plugs into a larger region. As I mentioned in the previous slide, the data will help you and assist you in building programs that look at both the lives and livelihoods of the businesses and the residents within your community. It isn't either or, it is both. Business owners are focused on ways to stay afloat right now. Basic survivability. Many of the business owners think that the changes they've made to their businesses due to COVID will be permanent. Pivots will likely change remote work, their supply chains. There's a great dependence right now on online stores, e-commerce, virtual services. These may all remain part of small business owners' plans, not only now, but in the next scenario, during and after the pandemic. On a number of the business recovery projects I've been working on, I'm finding consistent themes around issues shared by many or most business. Number one, the biggest adaptation they're having to make is how to reach their customers and to address changing customer behaviors. In some cases, this ties to online offerings and e-commerce, and in others, it's changing products and services to evolve, for example, in the restaurant industry, grab-and-go cuisine that's packaged up for customers who don't wish to come in to dine. The number two challenge I found is the issue with cash flow and financial forecasting. Do you order more inventory or not? Some of the inventory in sports equipment and seasonal activities is up 100 to 200%. So supply chains are disrupted. In some cases, the inventory is not made available for 2021, but actually moving into 2022 now. How will that affect businesses' cash flow? Businesses are looking for ways of revamping their products or services and getting into new markets to generate cash flow now. Where can we help here? Research assistance, target market identification, looking at what business units can be most profitable. Do they need a business coach? Do they need an advisor, somebody who can talk to them about how to reach these new markets? And the third area that has come up as a priority that Chris is going to touch on is recovery and resiliency scenarios. What if another wave hits? Not when another disaster occurs, or not if it occurs, but when. It's likely another disaster is coming in the future. How do they present themselves, or prepare themselves rather, in ways to bounce back now and in the future? Connect them to mentors and businesses, as I mentioned, matchmake, engage in the shop local programs. These are a handful of scenarios that Chris will expand on in a moment. Now, Chris, the important part of FDI is planning that for that 10 to 20% that are not just local, but there are other trends within the market of ways we can assist them. Now I'll hand it off to Chris, who will talk about the important things happening in FDI and how that they relate to the 10 to 20% that are not local. Chris, let's hear some of your awesome wisdom.
Well, thank you, Natalie, for that certainly unrealistic introduction. So that is wonderful. I do want to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in the world of FDI right now. And I think, as Natalie has intimated, it's not a great picture right now. Foreign direct investment volumes have dropped precipitously during COVID, particularly once the pandemic started in earnest. You can see on the graph that we have in front of us here from OECD data that FDI flows have dropped in about in half, following to what Natalie was talking about before. Now, this is on top of the fact that we were already seeing FDI volumes somewhat on the decline over the past couple of years, but the pandemic has absolutely shut down most forms of foreign direct investment. It's made doing projects very, very difficult, except in some cases where there are projects that simply, they had no choice but to move forward. I myself, from my own role as both a site selector and an economic development consultant, have seen some projects that have gone ahead and even have gone ahead in an expedited fashion. However, those really are the exception and not the rule. We simply don't know when FDI activity is going to resume at the levels that we had looked at previously. So as we start to look through this, it really kind of continues to make that continuous case. The volume of foreign direct investment, both in terms of the number of projects and the overall capital is going to continue to decline through 2020, and we simply don't know whether or to what degree it will recover in 2021. One quick thing to point out on this, though, also, in previous years, greenfield FDI was being supplanted to some degree by things like merger and acquisition activity or joint venture activity and partnerships and things of that were a little bit more indirect, but it was still foreign direct investment. Even that activity has taken a huge hit during the pandemic. So simply stated, foreign direct investment is on a much, much slowed pace. So it really does beg the question of what's happening now on an FDI basis, both in terms of what the companies are doing, as well as what good economic development organizations can do. And what we have really started to see is companies placing much more of an emphasis on resilience and recovery. So we know that companies are looking to persevere and survive through the pandemic. We know that they are trying to build, hardening into their supply chains, that they are looking to diversify and get into new areas that they haven't in the past. They're looking for ways so that they can fill market needs that have sprung up out of nowhere as a result of what's happened during the pandemic. So that's great for some. And for some companies, it's actually been a situation where they can't do that as easily. Both sorts of situations then start to beg the question of what does this mean for the role of EDOs, both in terms of the relationship to the companies that are there and to the community at large, and also in terms of starting to set the stage for what might happen in terms of recovery on the back end. So I said, let's kind of reframe this again. I was saying before, companies are focusing very much on resilience, determining how to make it through the crisis, and then set the stage for recovery. Economic development organizations face a very similar need. Right now, there's not a lot of inbound investment to have to service, to have to solicit, to have to win it. Instead, there are a lot of local businesses that need support. There's an opportunity to build systems and networks to help companies and institutions adapt. And lastly, there is still the need to ensure that your region has a positive brand image and identity outside, so that the things that you are doing, the networks that you are building, and the kinds of resources that are going to be important to investors in the future are known on that global stage. Also, how you respond now and how you support your businesses are going to become a vital part of what your story is on the FDI stage coming forward. So as we think about resilience, economic development agencies can do two things. First, right now, act to help to restore the local economy and find ways for your existing businesses to thrive. Help the area endure and recover. And then after this, you can begin to help plan and prepare for the future. So let's start thinking a little bit about the things that we mean here. So there are three really key areas. One, of course, is promote economic diversity. The next is reducing supply chain exposure. And then the third is promote business continuity practices throughout the community. So what does that mean, really? Well, first, in terms of economic diversity, we're really talking about increasing the resilience of your region because it reduces exposure to just one major industry in the event of a downturn or a disruption. That kind of disruption is not necessarily just because of a pandemic or because of a natural disaster. We have seen all kinds of different things that have happened because of changes in the economy. Thinking about what has happened with oil and gas. Think about the recession that happened 10 years ago. In some cases, some regions were harder hit because the part of the economy that was harder hit happened to be something that was highly concentrated in one particular region. So one of the things that you can do is take a look at your own region, understand where employment is concentrated, and figure out ways where that can be diversified. What does that box of moving parts, what are the different parts of that value chain? And what are some other areas where those might be able to be used productively? So areas completely, for example, dependent upon tourism are feeling more economic extreme effects of the pandemic. So you might want to be able to think about how the nature of that business, first of all, can be supported during the lean times, and then how it might be able to do some things during that interregionum. Reducing supply chain exposure. Where does the supply chain of your major businesses, where does it extend to, both in terms of things that are coming into those businesses as well as where it goes from there? What sorts of risks does that supply chain face? Businesses are evaluating this as we speak, and they have been for the past 7 months. And as a part of your role as an EDO or an IPA, one of the things you can do is to help to companies figure out different and alternative ways to match their supply chain, their value chain requirements. And in some cases, this may actually result in additional opportunities for other companies that are sitting there in your region that otherwise had not played a place there. This is another way of building both diversity and resilience into your local economy. Promoting business continuity. Now, as a part of BR&E, business retention and expansion, going through and actually trying to make sure that these networks are being created, but also helping businesses after the fact put together better disaster preparedness, better recovery planning, to be able to stress test them and say, well, what if stressor, what if disaster, what if unforeseen event X starts to happen? What is our response likely to be? What risks is that going to put us in front of? And how do we wish to respond to them? What opportunity might that actually create for us? And then, as I say, it's vitally important that you go ahead and stress test those so that you can understand where the weaknesses are as you go forward. Another key thing, and I really can't stress this enough, this is the time where you need to be spending time with your existing businesses. Spend that time with the companies that are there in your communities right now. You need to be actively reaching out to them and helping to find out what's going on in their world, and then helping them to find real solutions, new markets, new things to do to get through this completely unusual time. Where they're facing challenges, what can you do to help them and alleviate those challenges? Is there a need for matchmaking? Is there a need for funding? Is there a need to help their workers be retrained into new areas? Business retention and expansion is always a critical role for economic development agencies, but right now more than ever, this is the time where you can win the loyalty of your local businesses, of course, but more than that, it's how you help your community survive and thrive. So a couple of things that you might be able to do, and I'm actually going to lead you into a real world example of this in just a moment, but a couple of the key things that you can do, whether it's in normal times or certainly now, is to go around and talk to those businesses and find out the capabilities of that current company base, catalog the local and the regional needs that are coming up from the crisis, whether it's because of local requirements or whether it's because of value chain requirements that are going unfulfilled, and to be able to help matchmake and help convert businesses to be able to fill those requirements. What you're liable to see coming out of that, of course, is a couple of things that you desperately want to do: preserving that employment and that company base, and maybe even creating an opportunity for new investment, diversifying the economic base, and actually creating a way of building new resilience for key industries into the region as you go. So let me give you a real world example of kind of a best case example of what has happened with this. This was a story that came out of Waterloo over in Ontario. There was a company called Inksmith that had largely been producing educational materials and educational services. But as a result of the things that they were doing, they also had 3D printing and other kinds of capabilities in-house. Early on during the pandemic, when there was such a need for PPE and nobody had the stockpiles of them available, they immediately transitioned over into developing face shields and ended up churning out over 10,000 a day, and also increased their employment by 100 people. This is just one example of that. There's another company that I'm aware of down here in the States that was manufacturing, of all things, music CDs as well as musical products. They also got into the PPE opportunity, fulfilling that requirement, and giving them a means of sustaining themselves through the near term. Another thing to really be paying attention to during this time is we have never had such a spotlight placed upon the things that make business work as we have had right now. This is possibly the biggest stress test that we have ever had on infrastructure in a way that we had never anticipated. being able to think about how telecommunications work, not just in our CBDs, but also in the places where employees might need to work in a situation where they have to be dispersed. We've seen how public infrastructure has been so critical to the relative performance and adaptability of our communities. And in some cases, these have been real life and death issues. This is the time to really be thinking about how infrastructure investments serve and in some cases save our communities. The communities that had made the investments in telecommunications, even and especially into rural areas, were much better able to move their employees around safely, allow them to work from home productively, and be economically alive. Road and rail systems have allowed for movement of critical goods and supplies. Medical facilities, systems, and supply chains have been stressed in ways that we could never anticipated before now. And now is the time to look at the lessons learned from this and from other crises, look at ways of making our systems more adaptable and strong. Each of these is worth its own, remembering that it also creates jobs through the active investment. However, each also increases the region's ability to react to crisis and enhances its attractiveness in the future to new investment. So let's maybe transition a little bit about the new manual and some of the tools that are in here that might be usable both now during this time of resilience and adaptation, but then also in terms of building the foundation of what you can do for foreign direct investment from here out. Natalie?
Awesome, great points, Chris, in terms of restorative measures. Those are really good, not only about businesses that pivoted, but some of the components of our communities like infrastructure, gathering proper data to make those programs like matchmaking, workforce development, all very, very key points. Thank you for that. As I mentioned earlier, FDI and investment attraction at this time ties directly to business retention strategies, which Chris has also expanded on. It's about connecting businesses to the right resource at the right time. There are a lot of programs and new announcements coming out on a daily basis. On the 2 projects I'm working on right now on primary business visits with companies across southern Alberta, the issues that are emerging is there are programs that they don't know where to start, they don't know how to maneuver the labyrinth, they don't know what program they qualify for, or they do all the paperwork on the programs and discover they don't actually, in fact, qualify for them. So that matchmaking and you as a connector or conduit to that content is a huge part of an EDO's role right now. Tied to the existing programs, I'm seeing a number of areas recreate their own thing and not connect to a larger region. Connect to your regional innovation hubs, connect to your business recovery task force that are usually on a regional basis. There are a number of really good examples in our province like Economic Development Lethbridge, Pincher Creek, Grand Prairie and Grand Prairie County that are doing it on a regional basis and engaging all types of strategists to act as advisors and coaches to their businesses. We also have, just last week, the new International Graduate Entrepreneur Program stream was announced by the province. This opens the door for international students to invest in Alberta companies or start a new business. 2 streams have been announced, 2 more streams are coming on side that will tie to provincial nominee and international investment. So the more current relevant data you have on businesses, those that may be interested in selling, partnering, joint ventures, the better positioned you are for this new program. There are also a variety of grants and loans, as I mentioned, that businesses need help determining what fits. And finally, the last 2 tools that are both available or will be available online is the Community Toolkit for Economic Resiliency and the new FDI Guidebook. Take this content and adapt it to what your business community needs at this time. Plan for scenario B in 6 months' time to a year. We don't know how and when we'll need these resources, but to adapt them. Key takeaways. In terms of key takeaways, when we prepared for this presentation of what the new FDI manual would be last spring versus what should we present today, the big change because of the global crisis is know yourself, know thyself, gather the data, find current relevant data that applies to your business community, and align it with the resources, the programs that support your businesses best.
This is also, as we were talking about before, a really key moment to invest in strength for today and tomorrow. Take a look at the infrastructure requirements that your companies need now and that they'll need in the future. This is a way of making sure that you keep people employed now in a way that's going to build a foundation for very sound future growth in the future.
Your job right now as an EDO is to be with local business, connect with them, build relations, support them. It may be to help them support them so they thrive and grow, or it may be even to help them exit and transition to a new buyer.
And then lastly, of course, be flexible, particularly at times like now. Your job as an EDO, is to make sure that you are there as the custodian of your community and its economic future. So be flexible, not just as an organization, but consider that the companies that you're working with may have to completely pivot and adjust their business model, as Natalie was just talking about.
Excellent. That brings our session to an end. We look forward to answering any questions you might have and would appreciate additional dialogue.
Thanks so much, Chris and Natalie, for your valuable insight and information that you both shared. And thank you once again to Paul and MDB Insight for their sponsorship. Now, for the Q&A portion of the session, I would like to invite all of you to join us in the Zoom room for a live Q&A. Just click on the link that you see on your screen, and you'll be in there in a minute.